My boyfriend is a rizz god, a dating coach who teaches guys how to be impossibly charming. I just found a scar behind his ear. It was made by his ex, who got tired of his behavior. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those quiet, unremarkable nights that you later realize was the exact moment everything tilted. We were curled up on our gray sectional, the one he insisted on because it promoted conversational intimacy. A half-watched documentary about deep-sea life droned on the television, casting blue light across his face. My head was on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart, and my fingers were doing that mindless, affectionate thing they always did, tracing patterns in the short, soft hair at the nape of his neck. That's when I felt it. Just behind his right ear, hidden by the way his hair fell, was a ridge of skin that didn't belong. It was thin and hard, a tight raised line about an inch long, like a tiny buried worm. I'd touched this part of him 1,000 times. How had I never noticed it before? I lifted my head slightly. "What's this?" I murmured, my fingertip tracing the scar again, a little more deliberately this time. For a split second, the easy warmth in his eyes flickered out, replaced by something guarded and cold. It was so fast, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then the mask was back, the soft smile that could disarm armies. He chuckled, a low, smooth sound that was part of his professional toolkit. "Oh, that," he said, his voice a carefully crafted mix of nonchalance and old pain. "Ancient history, just a little souvenir from Chloe." He said her name like it was a bad taste in his mouth. Chloe, the ex, the one he only ever referred to in vague, pitying terms as a really difficult chapter. He shifted, gently repositioning me so he could look me in the eyes. This was another one of his moves, something he probably taught in his advanced connection seminars. Total focus, unwavering eye contact. It made you feel like you were the only person in the world. She wasn't well, babe. It was a really dark time for her. One night, things just got out of hand. She had a glass in her hand. It was a whole thing. He shrugged, a perfect, self-deprecating gesture. I probably deserved some of it. I wasn't the enlightened man you see before you today. He punctuated the sentence with a wink, and just like that, the narrative was sealed. He was the patient, evolved man. She was the unstable, violent ex. End of story. And the worst part is, I almost bought it completely, because that's Leo's gift. He doesn't just charm you, he builds a reality around you, a world where he is the calm, rational center, and everything makes sense through his lens. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to sink back into his chest and forget the hard, ugly feeling of that scar under my finger. This was the man who left little notes in my work bag, who could talk my anxious mother down from a panic attack over the phone in under 5 minutes, who remembered the name of my childhood dog after I'd mentioned it once, months ago. He was the Leo method, his online brand personified. His whole life was a testament to smooth interactions and flawless communication. How could a man who built an empire on teaching guys to de-escalate, connect, and validate have a history that ended with a glass shard behind his ear? But the story didn't feel right. It felt too clean, too practiced. The way he'd packaged her pain into a neat little anecdote to be dismissed, it was almost too smooth. Later that night, as he slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The blue light from the television was off, and the darkness in our bedroom felt heavier than usual. I thought about his workshops, the snippets I'd overheard. He taught men to mirror body language, how to use subtle vocal shifts to build rapport, how to frame stories to make themselves the hero or the sympathetic victim. He called it proactive charisma, and for the first time, I wondered if he ever turned it off. I replayed the moment on the couch, his flicker of annoyance before the charm kicked in, the casual, dismissive tone he used for a woman he supposedly once loved. He said she got tired of his behavior. He'd presented it as the behavior of a younger, less enlightened man. But what if it wasn't? What if the behavior was this masterful, seamless manipulation of the truth, this ability to make a violent act of desperation sound like a footnote in his grand story of self-improvement? I quietly slipped out of bed and went to the living room, the moon casting long shadows across the floor. Our apartment, my safe space, suddenly felt like a stage set, and I had the sickening feeling I'd just been shown a crack in the painted backdrop. My feet were cold against the polished concrete floor he'd chosen for its minimalist aesthetic. I looked around at the space we'd built together. The art on the walls, carefully selected to be conversation starters. The low-slung leather armchair where he'd sit and read, looking effortlessly intellectual. Every object felt like a prop. I ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of his laptop, sitting on the reclaimed wood desk that served as his command center. It was closed, a sleek silver rectangle holding all his secrets. A part of me screamed that this was a violation, a line I'd never imagined crossing, but a louder, colder voice whispered that the line had already been crossed tonight, on the couch when he'd fed me that perfectly polished mai. I had to know. I opened it. The screen flared to life, asking for a password. My heart hammered against my ribs. What would it be? My name? Our anniversary? Something sentimental? I tried them all. Nothing. I felt a flush of shame, my paranoia making me look foolish even to myself. Then I stopped thinking like a girlfriend and started thinking like one of his clients. What was the core of his philosophy? His entire brand was built on a 3-step process he'd trademarked. I typed it in. No spaces, all lowercase. Validate, connect, lead. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me. Of course, his password wasn't a secret shared with a lover. It was a business mantra. It was the formula. His desktop was obsessively organized. Folders were neatly arranged. Client intake, seminar outlines, the Leo method, V4. My eyes scanned the files, a morbid curiosity pulling me in. I clicked on a folder labeled Client Journeys. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each named for a man I'd never met. I opened one at random. It was a dossier. Notes on the client's target, her interests, her insecurities, her communication style. There were transcripts of text conversations with Leo's annotations in the margins. Here, you missed an opportunity to validate her anxiety about her job, reframe it as a sign of her ambition. It was a playbook for a human heart. He wasn't teaching men to be better partners. He was teaching them to be better hackers. I felt sick, but I couldn't stop. I had to find her. Chloe. I went back to the main desktop and saw a folder tucked away named simply Archives. It felt different from the others, less pristine. I clicked. Inside, there was only one file, a password-protected document titled Case Study for C. My blood ran cold. C. It had to be. I held my breath and typed the same password again, validate, connect, lead. It opened, and my world fractured. It wasn't a diary or a collection of old photos. It was a clinical, horrifying breakdown of their relationship written from his perspective. It was framed as a learning experience, a beta test for some of his most advanced theories. He had cataloged their fights, transcribing arguments verbatim. He logged her emotional triggers and graphed her patterns of irrational escalation. He had saved their emails, and next to her long, pleading messages, he had written notes. I scrolled through them, my hand shaking. I saw an email from her dated 3 years ago. "Leo, please, just talk to me," she'd written. "Don't use the voice. Don't do the thing where you tilt your head and tell me you hear my pain. I feel like I'm going crazy. I just want to talk to my boyfriend, not a hostage negotiator." Beside her raw, desperate words, Leo had typed a note to himself in red text. Subject is resisting validation framework, perceives empathy as a tactic. This indicates a deep-seated trust issue, likely stemming from her parental dynamic. Strategy. Double down on reassuring language, physical touch, hand on arm, shoulder, to reinforce connection. Reframe her perception of the voice as me simply trying to be calm for both of us. He was analyzing her, pathologizing her. He wasn't her partner, he was her warden, and her pain was just data. I scrolled down. further and further through a landscape of manufactured intimacy and methodical emotional erosion. Then I found the last entry. It was just a few lines, dated the day after he'd gotten the scar. It wasn't a description of a fight, it was a conclusion. Subject C has reached the terminal stage of resistance. The core programming is unassailable. Any further investment of resources is counterproductive. The emotional outburst involving shattered glassware is a predictable, if messy, data point confirming project failure. Initiate planned obsolescence protocol. Planned obsolescence. That's what he called a breakup? I stared at the words, the sterile corporate language he used to describe the end of a love affair, the night a woman was apparently driven to violence. The blue glow of the screen lit up my face, and from the bedroom, I heard the sound of sheets rustling. Leo was starting to wake up. My blood turned to ice. My fingers, frozen over the keyboard, suddenly felt clumsy and foreign. I didn't think, I just reacted. A frantic series of clicks. Close the document, close the folder. My mind was a roaring siren, screaming at me to erase any trace of my intrusion. The rustling from the bedroom stopped, replaced by the distinct, soft groan of the mattress as he shifted his weight. He was getting up. With a final silent click, I closed the laptop lid, the soft thud echoing like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I slid from the chair, my bare feet making no sound on the concrete, and slipped back into our bedroom, my heart a wild bird trapped against my ribs. I dove under the covers, pulling them up to my chin, and squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my breathing into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. It was the performance of my life. The door creaked open. A sliver of pale moonlight cut across the dark room, illuminating the edge of the dresser. I could feel his presence, a heavy stillness in the doorway. He was watching. Was he watching me? Did he know? Could he smell the fear on me, the adrenaline sweating from my pores? An eternity passed in those few seconds. I focused on the rise and fall of my own chest, a desperate prayer that it looked natural. Then I heard him pad softly into the ensuite bathroom. The tap ran for a moment, then shut off. He came back into the room, his shadow falling over the bed before he slid back under the covers beside me. He sighed, a warm, sleepy sound that used to make me feel safe, and rolled onto his side, facing away. I lay there rigid like a corpse, listening to his breathing even out, waiting for the moment I knew he was truly asleep again. But sleep didn't come for me. I spent the rest of the night staring into the darkness, feeling the heat from his body just inches away. It wasn't comforting. It felt like radiation. The morning was a masterpiece of surreal horror. The alarm went off, and Leo rolled over, just like any other day. He smiled, his eyes still soft with sleep, and kissed my forehead. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly hum. I smiled back, a brittle thing I'm sure didn't reach my eyes. "Morning," I managed to choke out. He didn't seem to notice. He got up and started the coffee, the familiar sounds of our routine, the grinding of beans, the clink of mugs, now forming the soundtrack to my own private nightmare. I watched him move around our kitchen, his movements easy and confident. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants and nothing else, the muscles in his back shifting as he reached for the sugar. I saw the man I loved, the man I had built a life with, and I saw a predator. A scientist, a man who graphed a woman's pain and called a breakup planned obsolescence. He handed me my favorite mug, the oversized ceramic one I'd bought at a farmer's market, filled with coffee made exactly how I liked it. "You seem a little quiet today," he said, his brow furrowing with that perfectly calibrated concern. He tilted his head. The move, the one Chloe had begged him to stop doing. My stomach churned. "Just tired," I said, taking a sip of the coffee. It tasted like ash. I had to know. The question wasn't if I was another project. The question was where he kept the notes. While he was in the shower, the rhythmic pulse of the water a countdown timer on my courage, I went back to the living room. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate the trackpad. I opened his laptop again. Validate, connect, lead. I felt a surge of self-loathing. I navigated to the Client Journeys folder, my eyes scanning the list of names. I didn't see a folder with my initial. A tiny, pathetic flicker of hope ignited and was just as quickly extinguished. Of course he wouldn't be that obvious. He would hide it, just like he'd hidden Chloe's file in the archives. I didn't have time to search for a hidden file. The water in the shower would stop any second. I thought about his obsession with process, with documentation. Where would he plan his work? I clicked on his calendar application. It opened to the current week, a color-coded tapestry of consultations and seminars. My eyes darted to the search bar. With a trembling finger, I typed my name. Dozens of entries popped up. Birthdays, dinner reservations, our anniversary. Normal couple things. I was about to close it, a wave of relief and confusion washing over me, when my eyes caught the very first entry from 2 years ago. The date we met. I'd always thought it was a chance encounter at a coffee shop. He'd told the story 100 times, how he saw me from across the room and was so captivated he had to come over. The calendar entry wasn't for a date, it was a 4-hour block scheduled for that afternoon. The title made the air leave my lungs in a single silent gasp. It read, Phase 1, Target Acquisition, Project Nightingale. Project Nightingale. The name echoed in the silent space between my ears, a beautiful, delicate word for something monstrous. It wasn't my name. It was a designation, a label on a specimen jar. My entire relationship, the 2 years I thought were the most real and vibrant of my life, was a project. The coffee shop wasn't a happy accident. It was a hunting ground. Our first conversation wasn't serendipity. It was phase 1. I stared at the screen, at the cold blue light of the calendar entry, and felt the story of my life being ripped out from under me, replaced by a clinical case study. The rhythmic pulse of the shower was the only sound, a steady, mocking drumbeat counting down the seconds until my captor returned. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was Subject N. The water shut off. The sudden silence was a physical blow, jolting me back into my body. My lungs, which had forgotten their function, suddenly screamed for air. With a gasp, I slammed the laptop shut. The click was too loud, a crack of thunder in the quiet apartment. I scrambled back to the bedroom, my movements clumsy and panicked. I threw myself onto the bed, pulling the duvet up, my mind a frantic white noise. Act normal. Look normal. What does normal even look like anymore? The bathroom door opened and a cloud of steam billowed into the room, followed by Leo. He had a towel slung low on his hips, water droplets clinging to his shoulders and tracing paths through the hair on his chest. He looked like a god, a perfect sculpture of a man, the man I had woken up next to for 730 mornings. He smiled, a slow, easy grin that used to melt my bones. "Hey, you're still in bed? Lazy bones." He walked over and leaned down to kiss me. I flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but he didn't seem to notice. His lips were warm and tasted of minty toothpaste. It felt like being branded. I forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "Just enjoying the quiet," I said, my voice thin and reedy. He ran a hand through my hair, his touch gentle, proprietary. "I was thinking," he said, straightening up and walking towards his closet, "we should go to that little Italian place in the North End tonight, the one you love. My treat." It was a test. It had to be. He'd seen something, a flicker of fear in my eyes, a tremor in my hand, and now he was deploying the charm, the reward phase. Validate, connect, lead. My blood ran cold. He was running a diagnostic on me. "That sounds amazing," I said, my voice sickeningly bright. I sat up, swinging my legs out of bed, forcing a manufactured enthusiasm into my movements. The whole day unfolded like a play, where I was the only actor who hadn't read the script. I showered, I got dressed, I made small talk about his work, about my plans for the day. Every word out of my mouth felt like a lie. Every smile was a mask. I watched him, really watched him for the first time. I saw the way his eyes would scan my face when I spoke, not listening to my words, but analyzing my micro-expressions. I noticed the subtle shift in his posture when he wanted to project authority, the calculated way he'd touch my arm to create a point of connection. It was all there, a language I was suddenly, horrifyingly fluent in. He was a machine, a beautiful, charming, intricate machine, and I had been willingly living inside its gears. He left for work around 9, kissing me goodbye at the door. "Have a great day, beautiful. Don't think too much," he said with a wink, as if he knew my mind was a hornet's nest. The moment the door clicked shut, the performance ended. I sagged against the wall, my legs giving out, and slid to the floor. I sat there, on the cold concrete of the entryway, and sobbed. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but quiet, ragged, hopeless ones. I cried for the woman I was yesterday, the naive, happy woman who believed in a chance encounter at a coffee shop. I cried for Chloe, subject C, who had reached the terminal stage of resistance. And then the tears stopped. A new feeling was pushing through the grief, something hard and cold and sharp. Fury. I wasn't going to be his messy data point. I wasn't going to be a project failure. I was going to find the rest of that file. I needed to see the whole blueprint. I needed to know what he'd done, what he was doing, and what he was planning to do to me. I went back to his laptop, my hands steady this time. The calendar was a dead end. It only gave me the project's name. I needed the full documentation. I searched the client journeys folder again, then the archives, even the trash bin. Nothing. He was too careful. He wouldn't leave his masterpiece lying around. I sat back, thinking. Leo was all about systems. Everything had a place, a logical flow. He was also arrogant. He would believe his system was impenetrable. He wouldn't hide it in a place he accessed frequently. He'd hide it somewhere mundane, somewhere he'd set up once and forgotten about, a digital filing cabinet for things he didn't need to see every day. My eyes scanned the desktop icons. There was a folder labeled Financials, another for Travel Docs. And then I saw it. A folder I'd never once had a reason to open. It was labeled simply System Resources. My breath caught in my throat. It was the perfect camouflage. Boring, technical, utterly uninteresting. I double-clicked. It was filled with subfolders, software licenses, driver backups, configuration logs. It was a digital junk drawer. But one folder name stood out. It wasn't like the others. It was called Active Protocols. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I opened it. Inside, there was a single Word document. The file name made the room spin, the letters blurring and sharpening in my vision. It read Nightingale _progression metrics version 2.4. I clicked it open. There was no preamble, no introduction, just cold, hard text formatted like a corporate report. The first line was a heading, subject profile and initial assessment, and beneath it, the words that would haunt me forever. Subject N, Nightingale, selected based on observable markers of emotional vulnerability, specifically a high degree of empathy and a pronounced savior complex. These traits present an ideal foundation for establishing deep-rooted emotional dependency. Savior complex. The words hung in the airless room, two little parasites that burrowed directly into my brain. It wasn't an insult, it was a diagnosis. He had looked at the best parts of me, my empathy, my desire to help, my instinct to care for people I loved, and he had seen a bug in my code, a vulnerability to be exploited. And Nightingale, of course, it wasn't a sweet, romantic nickname. I wasn't his songbird. I was Florence Nightingale, the dutiful nurse programmed to run toward the wounded. He hadn't fallen for me. He had identified me. My entire personality was just a key that fit the lock he'd designed. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of his desk to keep from falling. My love for him, the entire foundation of my last 2 years, was nothing more than a pre-existing condition. I forced myself to scroll. My eyes felt like they were burning through the screen, absorbing a poison that was spreading through my veins. It was all there, laid out in chilling, chronological detail. Our first date was logged as Phase 1, Day 1, rapport establishment. He'd noted my body language, the way I leaned in when he told a self-deprecatory story about his childhood. He'd given my receptiveness to manufactured vulnerability a score of 8 out of 10. The weekend we spent in that little cabin upstate, the one I thought was so spontaneous, it was listed as Phase 2 Environmental Insulation Test. The objective, the report stated, was to measure subjects' comfort level in a setting devoid of external social support. I had passed with flying colors, apparently. Every memory I cherished was cross-referenced with a metric. Every intimate conversation was a data point. Every gift he'd ever given me was logged under reinforcement schedule. I kept scrolling past charts and graphs that tracked my emotional investment levels against his calculated reciprocity. It was a business plan for my heart. He had a section on my friends with brief but brutal analyses of their potential to be disruptive influences and strategies to mitigate their impact. He'd labeled my best friend, Sarah, as a primary skeptic and had documented 3 separate occasions where he'd successfully reframed her critiques as expressions of jealousy. I remembered those conversations. I defended him. I reassured her. And all the while, he was pulling my strings, turning me into his own little apologist. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my handler. He was isolating me, not with threats or walls, but with careful, insidious psychological warfare. I finally reached a section titled Trigger Testing. My blood ran cold. I saw a date from about 6 months ago. I remembered it instantly. He'd come home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine. He'd been distant and cold. When I'd finally, timidly asked if something was wrong, he exploded. He accused me of being jealous, insecure, of trying to control him. It was a huge, terrible fight that left me shattered. I had spent the next 2 days apologizing, convinced I had been the one to push him away. I'd baked his favorite cookies. I'd left little notes for him. I'd done everything I could to earn back his affection. According to the document, this was a controlled stress test to induce insecurity and reaffirm subject's role as a appeaser. The notes were clinical. Subject exhibited expected patterns of self-blame. Re-engagement initiated via high-value reward, spontaneous jewelry purchase, 48 hours post-stimulus. Dependency quotient increased by 12%. He had wounded me on purpose, just to see if I'd come crawling back to lick his hand. And I had. I had to get out. The thought was a primal scream in my mind. But how? He had a key. He had all my passwords, framed as a loving gesture of transparency. He knew my schedule, my friends, my fears. Leaving wasn't a matter of packing a bag. It was a prison break. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I needed to see the endgame. What was the final phase? The last section was titled Phase 5, Long-Term Maintenance and Control. The objective was simple and horrifying: to transition the subject from an active romantic partnership to one of passive, unconditional support, creating a stable home base from which to conduct new acquisition protocols. He wasn't building a life with me. He was building a nest, a comfortable, stable place to return to while he went out hunting for subject O, P, and Q. I wasn't the love of his life. I was the live-in infrastructure. A new kind of clarity cut through the panic. It was sharp and cold and utterly terrifying. I couldn't run. Not yet. If I just disappeared, he would spin it. He would be the victim, the heartbroken boyfriend whose unstable girlfriend just vanished. He would use my story as a tool to gain sympathy for his next project. I couldn't let him win. I looked at the file on the screen. This document. This was everything. It was the blueprint to my own destruction, but it was also the only proof I had. It was his whole sick methodology, his entire playbook typed out and saved in a folder called Active Protocols. He was arrogant. He never thought his Nightingale would learn to read. My eyes darted around his home office. The room that had always felt like a sanctuary of productivity now felt like a laboratory. I needed a copy. I needed this file on a device he couldn't control, something I could take with me. My gaze landed on a small, black USB stick plugged into the side of his monitor hub, used for transferring photos from his camera. My heart hammered. It was right there. With a trembling hand, I reached over, my fingers closing around the cool plastic. I dragged the Nightingale file to the USB icon on the desktop. The progress bar appeared, a tiny blue line crawling from left to right. It was the slowest thing I had ever seen. Every second felt like an hour. Every creak of the apartment building, every distant siren was the sound of his key turning in the lock. The bar reached the end. Transfer complete. I ripped the USB from the port, the click echoing in the silent room. I shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans, the small, hard rectangle a lead weight against my thigh. It was my story, and I was taking it back. I didn't just close the folder, I erased the evidence of my visit. I cleared the recently opened history, my clicks frantic and precise. I made sure his desktop looked exactly as I'd found it, a neat grid of icons against a generic mountain landscape. Then I stood up, my legs feeling like they were filled with sand, and walked out of his office, gently closing the door behind me. The click of the latch was a gunshot in the silence. The USB in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the denim, a tiny ember of truth in the cold darkness of my reality. I went to the kitchen and started making tea, my hands performing the familiar motions on autopilot. Boil water, get mug, select tea bag. My mind was a blizzard of noise. He was building a nest. I was the infrastructure. The water heater clicked off, and in the sudden quiet, I heard it. The sound of his key in the front door. My entire body seized. For a split second, I was convinced he knew that some invisible alarm had gone off the moment I'd copied his file, and he was coming home not to his girlfriend, but to a traitor. The door swung open, and there he was. He smiled, that easy, devastating smile that I now knew was as practiced as a magician's sleight of hand. He dropped his gym bag by the door, the picture of casual confidence. He was wearing the gray Henley I loved, the one that made his shoulders look so broad. The sight of him, so painfully familiar and handsome, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. It was like looking at a perfect wax replica of the man I loved. It looked right, it sounded right, but underneath it was just cold, dead material. "Hey, Songbird," he said, walking over and kissing my forehead. The nickname landed like a stone in my gut. He'd used it just that morning. It was a test, a re-engagement tactic. I could see the flow chart in my head. I forced a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "Hey, how is the gym?" My voice was thin, reedy, but he didn't seem to notice. He was too busy performing his role. "Brutal," he said, with a theatrical groan, opening the fridge. "But worth it. Had to work off that pasta we had last night." He was referencing a shared positive memory, a classic rapport-building technique from Phase 1. It was nauseatingly transparent now. I felt like I had been given a pair of glasses that let me see the code of the Matrix, and the world I thought was real was just lines of green manipulative text. He pulled out a bottle of water and turned to me, leaning against the counter. "I was thinking," he began, his voice taking on that low, intimate tone he used for what the playbook called spontaneous future projections. "We should really go back to that cabin soon, maybe for a long weekend at the end of the month. What do you think?" The environmental isolation test. He wanted to run another diagnostic to check if his asset was still secure. The old me would have melted. The old me would have seen a future, a promise. The new me saw a lab rat being offered a return trip to its cage. I had to answer. I had to play my part. "I would love that," I said, my voice syrupy sweet. "That sounds perfect." His smile widened. He had no idea he was talking to a ghost. The woman he thought he was manipulating was already gone. I needed to start building my exit. I needed a plausible reason to be gone, a crack in the foundation of his perfect control. I took a sip of my tea, my hand shaking just slightly. "I'm a little worried about Sarah, though," I said, keeping my tone light, casual. His eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. The primary skeptic. I could feel him accessing that file in his head. "Oh yeah? What's up with her?" he asked, his concern perfectly feigned. "She and Mark are going through a really rough patch," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "I called me today just sobbing. I think she might need a friend to stay with her for a couple of days just to get her head straight." I was using his own tactics against him. I was framing my potential absence as an act of selfless care, reinforcing the very Nightingale persona he'd identified and exploited. I was banking on his arrogance, on his belief that I was incapable of this kind of deception. He considered it for a moment, his head tilted. I saw the calculation in his eyes. Letting me go would be a risk, an unsupervised period. But forbidding it would be an overt act of control, something his methodology warned against in the maintenance phase. It could flag his manipulation. He had to let me play the part of the good friend. "Of course, baby," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic empathy. "You have to be there for her. She's lucky to have you." He was commending my loyalty, reinforcing my role as a caretaker, all while underestimating me completely. He thought he was shoring up his defenses, but he was actually helping me dig my escape tunnel. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside him, I could feel the hard rectangle of the USB drive through the pocket of my pajama pants where I'd hidden it. He was asleep, breathing deeply and evenly, the picture of peace. There was no turmoil in him, no guilt. He was a machine, running his program. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, my heart a cold, steady drum. He thought he was the master puppeteer, the grand strategist. He had no idea that his most valuable subject had just stolen the instruction manual, and I was going to use it to burn his whole world to the ground. The morning was the hardest part. Waking up next to him felt like a betrayal of myself. His arm was draped over my waist, his breathing a warm puff against my neck. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, everything felt normal. My body relaxed into his familiar warmth out of pure instinct, a reflex built over 2 years of mornings just like this. Then, the memory of the USB drive, still a hard lump in my pajama pocket, flooded back in. I felt a jolt, as if I'd touched a live wire. I carefully, slowly slid out from under his arm. He stirred but didn't wake. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face, the handsome, peaceful mask. I wondered if he dreamed in flowcharts. I wondered if his subconscious ran diagnostics on his own performance. The thought was so cold, so alien, that it snapped me fully into focus. I was an operative behind enemy lines, and sentimentality was a liability I could no longer afford. I packed a small overnight bag in the pre-dawn gloom, my movements quiet and deliberate. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, a laptop. I made sure to be seen doing it when he finally woke up, yawning and stretching. "You heading out soon?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. He looked so boyishly innocent, it was obscene. "Yeah," I said, my voice carefully pitched with gentle sadness. "Just want to get to Sarah's before she completely falls apart. I'll make some coffee before I go." I was playing the Nightingale to perfection. I made the coffee, I kissed his cheek, a dry, papery press of lips to skin that felt like touching a stranger. "Drive safe, Songbird," he said, already reaching for his phone on the nightstand, probably to make a note in my file. Subject deployed to secondary location, monitoring for deviations, status compliant. The door clicked shut behind me, and this time, it didn't sound like a gunshot. It sounded like the opening of a cage. I didn't drive straight to Sarah's. I went to a little 24-hour diner a few towns over, a place with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of stale coffee and bacon. I needed a buffer zone. I needed to be in a place that held no memories of him. I ordered a black coffee and slid into a booth in the back corner facing the door. I pulled the USB from my pocket and set it on the table. It looked so small, so harmless, a little black rectangle that held the entire architecture of my own destruction. My hands were shaking so hard that I had to clasp them together. For a moment, I was tempted to just throw it away. To drive to Sarah's, cry on her shoulder, and then just disappear, start a new life. But that would be letting him win. That would be letting him move on to the next woman, the next project, with his methods refined and his confidence bolstered. This wasn't just about me anymore. When I finally got to Sarah's apartment, she threw the door open before I could even finish knocking. I was so worried. You sounded so weird on the phone yesterday. Her face was etched with genuine concern, a stark, painful contrast to the manufactured empathy I'd been living with. The dam I'd so carefully constructed inside me broke. I didn't even say anything. I just fell into her arms and started sobbing. Ugly, gasping sobs that tore through my chest. She just held me, stroking my hair, leading me inside to her couch. "Okay," she said softly after I'd cried myself into a state of hiccuping exhaustion. "Tell me everything, and don't leave a single detail out." And so I did. I told her about the scar, the locked office, the password, and the files. I told her about the playbook, the phases, the nicknames, the calculated future projections. As I spoke, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to a white-hot protective fury that I was so grateful for I could have cried all over again. When I was done, I pulled out the USB drive. "It's all on here," I whispered. We sat at her small kitchen table, my laptop open between us. My heart hammered against my ribs as I plugged it in. The drive appeared on the desktop, innocently labeled Projects. I clicked it open. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just documents. It was a meticulously organized library of emotional warfare. There were folders labeled with names: Chloe, Maria, Jessica. And there, near the top, was my name, Anna. Clicking on it felt like a violation, like reading my own autopsy report while I was still breathing. Inside were subfolders: Phase 1, Rapport and Data Mining. Phase 2, Isolation and Dependency. Phase 3, Maintenance and Control. There were audio files, secretly recorded conversations from our early dates. There were text logs with his notes scribbled in the margins, analyzing my use of certain words, my response times. There was a document titled Vulnerability Matrix, and it listed everything I had ever confided in him: my fear of failure, my complicated relationship with my mother, my insecurity about my art. Beside each one was a corresponding column titled Exploitation Strategy. But the worst part, the part that made the air leave my lungs in a silent scream, was a video file. It was from the weekend after my grandfather died. I had been a complete wreck, and he had held me on the couch while I cried for hours, telling me how strong I was, how he would never let me go through anything alone. I remembered feeling deeply, profoundly loved in that moment. It was a cornerstone memory of our relationship. The file was labeled Grief_Scenario Test Successful Dependency Deepened. He hadn't been comforting me. He had been running a test. He had been taking notes. I was a science experiment, a project. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with grief or sadness. It was the absolute chilling clarity of pure rage. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had strip-mined my soul for parts. Sarah put her hand on mine. Her knuckles were white. "That monster," she breathed, her voice trembling with anger. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the screen, at the list of names, at the cold, clinical dissection of my own humanity. The old me was gone. The Nightingale was dead. In her place was something harder, something forged in the ice of this betrayal. I looked at Sarah, my own eyes feeling like chips of glass. "He's a coach," I said, my voice low and steady. "He sells a product. He sells a story. I have his entire business plan right here. I have his client list, his testimonials, his trade secrets." I closed my laptop with a definitive snap. "He taught me everything about his world," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "He just forgot to teach me what happens when the subject gets a hold of the instruction manual." I'm not just going to leave him, I'm going to dismantle him. I'm going to use his own playbook against him, and I'm going to burn his kingdom to the ground on a stage so big he'll never be able to hide from it. Sarah didn't flinch. She just took a slow, deep breath and gave a single, sharp nod. Her eyes, which had been filled with a kind of horrified sympathy moments before, now held the same cold, hard light as my own. It was the look of a co-conspirator, of an ally in a war that had just been declared. The air in her tiny kitchen, which had been thick with tears and shock, suddenly felt charged, electric, like the moments before a storm breaks. We weren't two friends comforting each other anymore. We were a two-woman command center, and her kitchen table was our war room. The next few days were a blur of caffeine and cold fury, fueled by takeout containers and a shared, burning sense of purpose. We didn't sleep much. We barely spoke of anything else. My phone buzzed with texts from him, each one a perfectly crafted little dart of concern. Thinking of you, Songbird. Hope Sarah's okay. Let me know if you need anything at all. I miss your voice. I read each one with a detached, clinical interest, analyzing it the way he would have analyzed mine. And then I would go back to work. We dissected that USB drive with the precision of surgeons. We created a timeline, cross-referencing his notes with my old calendars and text messages. We pulled out the most damning audio clips, the ones where his voice dripped with that practiced, hypnotic sincerity as he coaxed secrets out of me, or Chloe, or Maria. We found his client list, a spreadsheet of insecure men paying him thousands of dollars to learn his predatory system. We found their testimonials they'd sent him, gloating about their successes, using his terminology, his phases. It was a sickness, a franchise of emotional vampirism, and we had the whole business model laid out on my laptop screen. The hardest part was reaching out to the other women. My hands shook as I typed the first message to a woman named Chloe, whose entire emotional landscape had been mapped and mined in a folder right next to mine. I sent it from an anonymous email account, attaching a single redacted document from her file as proof. I didn't know if she would believe me, or if she would think I was crazy. For 12 agonizing hours, there was silence. Then a reply. I thought I was losing my mind. Thank you. One by one, they answered. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, but all of them had felt that same creeping, indefinable wrongness. We were a small, broken chorus, but our voices together started to sound like a roar. We built a simple, clean website, a digital evidence locker. At the top, we put the video. It was an 11-minute compilation, a highlight reel of his cruelty. It started with his own voice from a secret recording of a coaching call, explaining the philosophy of the vulnerability matrix. It cut to screen recordings of the files, my name, Chloe's name, Jessica's name, scrolling by. It showed his notes on my grandfather's death next to the video of him comforting me. We laid it all out, piece by damning piece, using his own words, his own meticulous documentation, as the narrative. We didn't have to editorialize, we just had to show the truth. The final piece was a link to a public folder containing every file, every audio clip, every client testimonial, with personal information redacted, but the methods left bare for the world to see. It was his entire kingdom, gift-wrapped for his own destruction. The night we were ready, Sarah and I sat on our couch, the laptop glowing between us. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. I felt a strange, unnerving calm. I had walked through the fire of his creation and come out the other side. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me and Chloe and Maria and every woman who would come after us. It was about taking the story he had tried to write for me and setting it on fire. I took a deep breath and I hit publish. I shared the link to my own social media, to his, to the pages of every self-help guru and dating influencer we could find. Then I sent one final direct email to his entire client list with the subject line, "A note from your coach's subject." And then I turned off my laptop. We didn't celebrate. We just sat there in the quiet dark of Sarah's living room. A few minutes later, my phone lit up. It was him. "Songbird, what are you doing? Let's talk. Don't throw this away." The name felt like ash in my mouth. I looked at the message, at this last pathetic attempt to pull a string, to activate a response. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel pain. I felt nothing at all. I held my thumb over the screen, and I deleted the conversation. The scar behind his ear was a warning someone had tried to leave. My story is the receipt. So I have to ask you, after all of this, what's the difference between a grand romantic gesture and a perfectly executed strategy? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.